Picture a settlements clerk named Kim. It is the morning of February 24th, 1995, and she's sitting at her desk at Barings Futures Singapore in the office tower on Shenton Way when she notices that the numbers do not add up. There is a discrepancy in the accounts, a gap between what the books show and what the Singapore International Monetary Exchange is asking Barings to pay in margin calls. She raises it with Nick Leeson, the head of derivatives trading, who is also, in an arrangement that will become the most scrutinized management failure in financial history, the head of the back office that processes and records Leeson's own trades. He is unavailable. He is, at that moment, at Kuala Lumpur Airport with his wife, Lisa, having fled Singapore the previous night after leaving a 2-word note on his desk. I'm sorry. Kim's discrepancy, traced within hours to an account numbered 88888, turns out to be the most expensive back office error in the history of banking. Account 88888 contains losses of $827 million, $1.4 billion, accumulated over 33 months of unauthorized, concealed, and increasingly desperate derivatives, trading by a 27-year-old from Watford, whose formal academic qualification was a mathematics grade that had prevented him from becoming an officer in the British Army. Those losses are, as Barings' own auditors will confirm within 48 hours, twice the bank's entire available trading capital. There is no recovery. There is no rescue. On February 26, 1995, Barings Bank, founded in 1762, manager of the personal accounts of Queen Elizabeth II, financier of the Louisiana Purchase and the Napoleonic Wars and the Suez Canal transaction and the Canadian Pacific Railway, is declared insolvent. The story of how this happened is, on its surface, a story about a single individual, about Nick Leeson's background, his ambition, his trading positions, and his lies. It is told that way because that framing is dramatically compelling and because Leeson himself, through his memoir Rogue Trader and the film it spawned and the after-dinner speaking circuit he has occupied ever since his release from prison, has been the primary narrator. But the story of how account 88888 was allowed to accumulate $827 million in losses over 33 months, through 4 internal audits, through repeated requests from Singapore for funds that London authorized without question, through warning signs that any functioning risk management system would have caught, is not primarily a story about Nick Leeson. It is a story about an institution that had been so successful for so long and whose culture so thoroughly prioritized the appearance of profit over the reality of risk, that it was constitutionally incapable of asking the question that would have saved it. Where is this money actually coming from? Nicholas William Leeson was born on February 25, 1967 in Watford, Hertfordshire, the son of a self-employed plasterer and a nurse. He left school in 1985 without the A-level results that would have allowed him to take an officer's commission in the Army, a failure that, by his own account, was the shaping disappointment of his early life. He began his career as a clerk at Coutts Bank, settling paper checks, then moved to Morgan Stanley's futures and options back office in 1987, clearing and settling listed derivatives. He joined Barings Bank's settlements department in London in July 1989 on a salary of $12,000 a year. In 1990, Barings dispatched him to Jakarta to sort through a back-office mess involving $100 million in unsettled share certificates. He resolved it within months, earning a reputation as an exceptionally capable operations man. In April 1992, when Barings decided to open a futures and options office in Singapore, Leeson was the natural choice to run it. The structural anomaly that made everything possible was created before Leeson's first trade. Barings appointed him simultaneously as general manager of Barings Futures Singapore, responsible for all trading operations, and as head of the back office that settled, processed, and recorded those same trading operations. The separation of front office trading from back office settlement is one of the most basic controls in financial services, a principle so elementary that it is taught in introductory courses and encoded in the regulations of every major exchange. It exists for exactly the reason that its absence caused at Barings. A trader who controls his own settlement records can hide his own losses, and the only people who can catch him are the supervisors who have read the records they do not know have been falsified. Barings' senior management in London were aware of this structural problem. An internal audit report circulated to Barings' senior management in London in August 1994 revealed that Barings Futures Singapore was exposed to great risks because Leeson took charge of both dealing and settlement operations. The bank chose to retain Leeson's position because of his experience and the profits he had generated. They did not know, at the time of that decision, that he had already incurred the losses hidden in 8888. By the time that audit report reached London, account 88888 contained losses of $373.9 million. The account itself had been created on July 3, 1992, the day Barings Futures Singapore began trading on Cymex. Its stated purpose was to record error trades made by inexperienced staff, the standard mechanism by which back-office mistakes are flagged and resolved. Leeson later stated, and most accounts accept, that it was first used to cover an error made by a subordinate, a female colleague who had sold 20 Nikkei futures contracts for Fuji Bank instead of buying them. The escalation was then driven by a logical trap from which Leeson could see no exit. Having hidden a loss, he needed to trade his way back to a position where the hidden loss could be absorbed, which meant taking positions large enough to generate the required recovery profit, which meant positions too large and too risky to be authorized, which, when they went wrong, generated larger losses than the original ones, requiring yet larger positions to recover. By the end of 1992, account 8888 had losses of $2 million. By late 1993, losses had reached $23 million. By the end of 1994, they had risen to $208 million. The funding mechanism that sustained the concealment was the margin call. When a derivatives trader holds open positions on an exchange, the exchange requires daily cash deposits, margin, to cover the mark-to-market movement in those positions. As Leeson's positions grew and moved against him, Cymex required Barings to post ever larger margin payments. Leeson requested these funds from London as legitimate business requirements, the normal cost of financing client trading positions. London authorized them. The amounts grew from millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions, but the pattern was so consistent, and Leeson's apparent profitability so well established, that the requests were processed without the systematic questioning that the amounts required. By February 1995, Barings had transferred approximately $742 million to Singapore to fund margin calls, money that, once posted to Cymex, was used to support positions that were entirely unauthorized and almost entirely underwater. The positions themselves were not subtle. By February 1995, Leeson controlled half of all open interest in Nikkei 225 futures contracts, traded on Cymex, and 85% of open interest in Japanese government bond futures. These were not positions that could be hidden from other market participants. They were so large that other traders recognized them, knew who held them, and began trading against them deliberately, correctly calculating that someone with that scale of exposure could be forced to close at disadvantageous prices. Leeson was, in the final weeks, not trading against the market. He was attempting to move it, purchasing futures contracts on a scale that he hoped would push the Nikkei up and allow him to close his positions at a profit. In 3 months, he purchased more than 20,000 futures contracts, worth around $180,000 each. It was all in vain, and these trades totaled 3/4 of the eventual $827 million loss. The market is not moved by a single participant, however large. It is moved by the collective decisions of every participant simultaneously. Leeson's purchases were absorbed by sellers who were happy to take the other side of his positions, correctly judging them to be overvalued. The proximate trigger for the final collapse was a natural disaster that Leeson had no ability to predict or control. On the evening of January 16, 1995, Leeson placed a short straddle, an option strategy that profits when an underlying asset stays within a defined price range, effectively betting that the Nikkei would not move significantly overnight. The strategy seemed reasonable. The Nikkei had been relatively stable, and the Japanese economy was recovering from a prolonged recession. At 5:46 in the morning on January 17th, the Great Hanshin earthquake struck the port city of Kobe. It registered between 6.9 and 7.3 on the Richter scale, lasted 20 seconds, and killed over 6,000 people. It also sent Asian equity markets into a sharp decline. The Nikkei fell. Leeson's straddle lost money. He responded by betting that the Nikkei would recover, buying long futures positions on a massive scale, convinced that the market had overreacted and would rebound. The rebound did not come. The Nikkei continued to fall throughout January and February 1995, and with it Leeson's positions, and with his positions the last of Barings' capital. By February 23rd, 2 days before his 28th birthday, Leeson calculated that the situation was beyond recovery. He and Lisa left Singapore that night for Kuala Lumpur. Before departing, he left a 2-word note on his desk. Barings executives in London received a confession letter from Leeson. They informed the Bank of England. Governor Eddie George spent the weekend of February 25th and 26th attempting to organize a rescue. The same Litterdale playbook from 1890, the same private sector consortium, the same frantic calls to the major London banks. This time, it did not work. The total losses, $827 million at the point of Leeson's departure, rising to $927 million once all trading positions were finally closed out, exceeded what any consortium was willing to underwrite. No institution would pay an unknown sum to assume an insolvent bank's derivatives book. The Bank of England announced on February 26th that Barings had been placed in administration. ING purchased what remained for warmer haulers on March 3rd. Leeson was arrested at Frankfurt Airport on March 2nd, 1995, where he had stopped during a circuitous flight home. He fought extradition for 9 months and was eventually returned to Singapore, where in December 1995 he pleaded guilty on 2 counts of fraud, deceiving bank auditors with forged documents and cheating Cymex. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. While in Changi Prison, he was diagnosed with colon cancer. He was released on July 3rd, 1999, having served 4 years and 4 months. He wrote his autobiography, Rogue Trader, in 1996 while in prison, which was adapted into a film in 1999, starring Ewan McGregor and Anna Friel. His first wife, Lisa, divorced him during his imprisonment. He remarried in 2003 and settled in Galway, Ireland. The Bank of England's Board of Banking Supervision published its investigation report on July 18, 1995, less than 5 months after the collapse. The report is one of the most comprehensive post-mortem analyses of an institutional failure ever produced, and its findings are damning in ways that extend far beyond Leeson individually. The report concluded that Barings' collapse was the consequence of the unauthorized and ultimately catastrophic activities of, it appears, one individual, Leeson, that went undetected as a consequence of a failure of management and other internal controls of the most basic kind. The failures identified included the dual role that gave Leeson control of both trading and settlement, the absence of any independent verification of the profits Leeson claimed to be generating, the repeated authorization of large margin payments to Singapore without requiring explanation of the underlying positions they supported, and the culture of deference to star performers that meant the more profitable Leeson appeared, the less scrutiny he received. A 1993 internal memo had specifically warned London that Leeson's dual role created an excessive concentration of powers that is particularly dangerous. That memo had been noted and not acted upon. A July 1994 internal audit report had identified the same problem and recommended separation of the trading and settlement functions. Barings chose to retain Leeson's position because of his experience and the profits he had generated, without apparently considering that the profits and the structural anomaly might be related. In the final weeks, London was repeatedly asked to fund margin calls that were individually plausible but collectively extraordinary, and the individuals authorizing those transfers appear to have asked no questions that a competent risk manager would have considered essential. The financial regulatory consequences were immediate and global. The collapse of Barings, combined with the concurrent Daiwa Bank scandal in the United States, prompted a systematic review of derivatives regulation and internal controls across all major financial markets. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision accelerated work on what became the Basel II framework, incorporating operational risk, the risk of losses from inadequate processes, people, and systems, as a formal capital requirement for the first time. Every major bank in the world reviewed its separation of front and back office functions. Cymex merged with the Stock Exchange of Singapore to form the Singapore Exchange, with substantially enhanced oversight of large concentrated positions. The requirement for independent middle office risk management functions, separate from both the trading desk and the settlements back office, became standard practice precisely because Barings had demonstrated what happened in their absence. The comparison to 1890 completes the Barings story with an irony almost too pointed to be believed. In November 1890, as the previous script in this series, documents Barings had been technically insolvent, overexposed to Argentine debt, holding losses it could not fund, and had been rescued by a consortium organized by the Bank of England Governor William Lidderdale. The rescue had worked. The bank had been recapitalized. It had survived for another 105 years. In February 1995, the same institution was again technically insolvent, overexposed to Nikkei derivatives holding losses it could not fund, and the Bank of England Governor Eddie George attempted the same Lidderdale approach, a private consortium assembled over a weekend guaranteeing the institution's liabilities. This time, no consortium would come. The losses were open-ended. Unlike the 1890 case, where the Argentine securities had a recoverable value that could be estimated, Barings' derivatives positions were still moving, and no bank was willing to assume an unlimited liability. The 1890 rescue had bought Barings 105 years. The 1995 rescue attempt bought it a weekend. ING got the assets, the liabilities, the staff, the name, and the history, all of it for $1. The bank that had been founded in 1762 and had helped finance the American purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803 for $15 million, the largest real estate transaction in history at that point, and that had been called the sixth great power of Europe by a French duke in 1818, and that had survived the Argentine crisis of 1890 and two world wars, and the Big Bang deregulation of 1986, and the entire transformation of global finance over 233 years, was destroyed by a 27-year-old from Watford, who had started his working life settling paper checks at Coutts, who had been given control of his own back office, and whose only significant formal statement about the situation he created consists of 2 words left on a desk in Singapore. The 2 words were accurate. They were insufficient. They were, in their inadequacy, the perfect summary of every aspect of an institution that had known for 2 years that something was wrong and had not asked the right questions. and of a trader who had known for 3 years that his situation was beyond recovery and had not found a way to tell the truth. The note said, "I'm sorry." Barings said, "I'm sorry too," with its 1,200 staff in Singapore who lost their jobs, and its bondholders who received nothing, and its shareholders who received nothing, and its 233-year history that ended definitively and without rescue on a Sunday morning in February 1995, when ING agreed to pay £1 for what remained.